So this lesson is entitled Turn Yourself into a Lion-like Practitioner. So being a lion-like practitioner is a very important aspect of this particular last teaching given by Khenpo Sodargye on this wonderful text. So the contents of this lesson is fourfold. So first it starts with stories of auspicious signs. Then there's a long explanation of the 9 benefits of this practice, and then how the Buddha applied this practice himself, and finally the afterword. So I'll just go points one by one. I'm sorry, also I have a cold, so maybe my voice is not ideal, but it should still be hopefully audible. So I'll go point by point and make some little summaries for each of the points. So we'll go one by one. So we start with the stories of auspicious signs. So in this particular part of the teaching, Khenpo Sodargye starts with the dragon boat, and then he gives different stories about rainbows. So the first part is the little conversation that Khenpo has about the Dragon Boat Festival, and then he gives an explanation of the Dragon Boat story, and then talks about like how people interpret the story, and then see if this is an auspicious event or not an auspicious event. And then Khenpo talks about the interesting stories of rainbow, the different stories of rainbow, which are also quite interesting. And the first one is about a stupa that was erected for Khenpo Sodargye in his hometown in Dragko in Kham. And then this was the last day of Sagadawa, and then there was a solar eclipse, and it was also the Father's Day on that day, and it was a sunny blue sky with white clouds. And then some people contacted Khenpo to tell him that there was a rainbow above the stupa. And then he himself was doubtful, and eventually when he received the photos, he saw that there was indeed a rainbow over that stupa. And seems like he himself did not make too much out of this at that moment. So that's the first story that Khenpo talks about. And then he also refers to this other time which happened before, which was this one. The first story was around 2020, if I remember well. This one more about 2015, when he was giving a talk at the Graduate School of Education at Beida, Beijing Daxue. And then there were lots of people gathered that day, like there were supposed to be 500, but in the room there were 500 spaces, but then 700 people gathered. And then by the end of the talk, when they came out and then walking outside, they saw that there was this beautiful rainbow that was spread all over the sky. And then the driver and professors from the university told Khenpo that although they've been in Beijing for many decades, it's the first time they saw such an amazing rainbow. So that was quite interesting. And Khenpo says that it might have been an auspicious sign. And then he said that ever since, his Dharma activities have been going quite smoothly and successfully. So it's quite interesting to hear. And then Khenpo reports the stories or mixed, there's a typo in the text. His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche's different approaches to people or to rainbows or to people talking about rainbows. So I thought that was also an interesting thing. And then the first one is a master who came back and then saw Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche. That was in 1986, this one. And then that master was talking about the fact that he was giving teachings and then the rainbow that appeared. And then he said that this was a sign of auspiciousness, but then His Holiness was a little bit annoyed and then said, "What's so unusual about the rainbow?" That's quite interesting. But other times, His Holiness would observe that there would be rainbows and then some auspicious signs, and then he would mention that these are auspicious signs. So it's quite interesting to see that sometimes a rainbow looks like it's basically just a rainbow, but sometimes a rainbow and other signs could be considered as auspicious signs. So it's interesting to look at this and the way we interpret these things, and can be interesting for us as well. Yeah, Kempo actually mentions that it is up to us to determine whether certain appearances are auspicious, inauspicious, or simply irrelevant. This depends on our devotion. So it's quite nice to hear this. We can perhaps move to the second part, which relates to the 9 benefits of this practice. So there are indeed 9 benefits that are identified throughout the practice, and then I identified for each of them the page in the text. It could be a simple way to make a reference to them. And I'm not going to expand on them too much because I'll try to be quick, but I think it's nice to see just a few words for each of them. And Kempo explains them quite straightforwardly. And at the same time, we might be using some of them as questions for this week's lesson. So it's better that I don't expound too much on this, but they're quite nice. So let's just take a quick look on each of them. So the first one is that it enables you to practice constantly. So this is basically something that we have been reflected on often during this teaching. Kempo says that ordinary people's practice is easily interrupted when facing suffering, regardless of whether their suffering is caused by poor physical health, mental affliction, lack of food, family issues, and so on. So basically, it is hard to practice when we suffer. This is something we've mentioned in the past as well. But at the same time, he adds that when ordinary people are happy, they tend to indulge themselves in their little happiness by traveling continually, enjoying food, entertaining themselves with various activities, and so on. So basically, both suffering and happiness can provide very good justification for interrupting one's practice. So this is why, like when we look at it from the root text, it says that if we cannot practice when we're suffering because of all the anxiety we go through, and we cannot practice when we're happy because of our attachment to happiness, then that rules out any chance of our practicing Dharma at all. Yeah. So second, it helps you become a stable person. This one, I think I won't mention too much because this is a subject of a question, so it would be nice to let people talk about this. So I'll just maybe repeat what Kempo said in the text. So generally speaking, a stable person makes people around them feel safe and that they can be relied on, whereas an emotional person makes others feel insecure. So I guess it will be interesting to hear what people think about this and how they think of a stable person, and then if they know stable persons around them and how it affects them when they see a stable person versus when they see an emotional person. Okay, so third one. It turns out, and it turns you into a lion-like practitioner. So once again, this is a subject of a question for the lesson. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but maybe at least we can look at the root text. If you do have this training, no matter where you live, in a solitary place or in the middle of a city, whatever the people around you are like, good or bad, whether you're rich or poor, happy or distressed, whatever you have to listen to, praise or condemnation, good words or bad, you'll never feel the slightest fear that it could bring you down in any way. No wonder this training is called the lion-like yoga. This is, I think, quite inspiring. And then will be maybe interesting to hear what people have to say about this idea, like what's this lion-like and how they maybe aspire to this in their life. Maybe. Okay, so let's move quickly to the next. It helps you get along well with anyone. So Kempo notes that the reasons why people's propensities and karma vary considerably is because they may be reborn from different places. Then he gives examples of the different places where people can be coming from, where they can be coming from previous lives, and then they basically all come together and then eventually interact together. So people around us come from different backgrounds. So considering all these differences, Genpo asks the question, how can we expect for everyone to easily get along with us? Well, considering that all these people come from very different backgrounds and are carrying different karmas on their shoulders, which will manifest in certain ways in this life. So how can we expect that everybody will get along with us easily? So I think it's a very interesting thing to think about. So indeed, this variability of encounters can create a lot of chaos in our lives. One person we meet is happy, the next is angry. Some people are very picky, difficult to handle. Others lose their temper easily, and so on. So it's kind of complicated social interactions that we have because of karma. And then the root text says, without the knowledge of how to transform suffering into happiness, we are often unable to handle interpersonal relationships properly. So this is one of the great qualities that we can get to be able to get along with everyone, with anyone. Next one. It enables you to experience the splendor of an unimaginable bliss. So Kempo explains what happens in the mind of those who have practiced this teaching persistently. So he observes that although their life may appear no different from anyone else's, when they eat, they sleep, or they do all kinds of everyday things, their mind will be completely different. So although it appears like they're like everybody else, but their mind is very different. This is basically because they will no longer be as sensitive to challenges, to pain, to illness, to basically all the normal pitfalls that define the human condition. He concludes that unlike many others, those practitioners will not easily fall prey to suffering. And then the root text says, whatever you do, your mind will be happy, peaceful, spacious, and relaxed. Your whole attitude will be pure, and everything will turn out excellently. Your body might be living in this impure world of ours, but your mind will experience the splendor of an unimaginable bliss, like the bodhisattvas in their pure realms. This is a great benefit of someone who is able to practice this turning suffering and happiness into the path. It's wonderful. Next one. It will be your true friend. So this one to me was quite interesting as well, because that can raise the question of what is a true friend. And then actually maybe we could say that a true friend is a person who never lets you down under any circumstance. So they're there for you. But even then, a true friend is not there when you're alone. So a true friend can still let you down in a way. So when we're alone, there can be so many mental events that can be generated in our mind. And then these mental events can lead to suffering and more suffering. So Kempo explains that with this practice, when we are all alone, we won't feel bored or pessimistic. We won't feel that we have been abandoned by family and friends. He says that this practice is the ultimate caretaker, basically, even in solitude. So it's quite nice. And then there's this excerpt from the root text that says, like, keep happiness under control, put an end to suffering. With happiness under control and suffering brought to an end, when you're all alone, this training will be your true friend. When you're sick, it will be your nurse. This is quite amazing and reassuring to think of this. Okay, next one. It makes attaining the extraordinary samadhi easier. So this one, again, is related to one of the questions for this week, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, because this might be discussed during the teaching, so we could probably look at the root text. If by using happiness as the path, you become wary and disgusted with it, and by taking suffering as the path, you make your mind clear and cheerful, then you easily attain the extraordinary samadhi, which makes mind and body capable of doing anything you wish. It's just also quite amazing to think of that, to think of this benefit. Okay, next one. It perfects your discipline. So Kempo observes that those who break their vow usually do so because they view happiness as having a true substantial existence, and then they become carried away by it. So it's easy to break or to lower your discipline or have looser discipline if we are very attached to things and then become carried away by them. Kempo assures us that through this training, we will no longer cling to happiness. Instead, we will see happiness as painful, illusory, impermanent, and empty. This will allow to develop renunciation in samsara. In this way, we will create the basis for upholding our vows and staying on the right course. Kempo says that basically transforming happiness becomes the fundamental cause of renunciation, and transforming happiness further purifies our discipline because we will no longer fear hardship or suffering. And then from the root text, we can read the instruction, I feel. And this is the Jigme Tenpe Nyingma, who says it's the instruction I feel is the most profound of all, for it perfects discipline, the source of everything positive and wholesome. This is because not being attached to happiness creates the basis of the extraordinary discipline of renunciation, and not being afraid of suffering makes this discipline completely pure. Wow, once again. As for the last benefit, so it assists you to realize emptiness. Kempo insists that by training in this practice, one can realize that all phenomena in samsara are like a dream or an illusion, and wherever one goes, one will be as free of worry as if they were walking into a lovely garden. It's nice, lovely garden. Kempo adds that these beings who train persistently in this practice will be driven by their great compassion to help sentient beings, because they will understand their suffering and the causes of their suffering, and they will wish to help them achieve happiness. So those who have attained higher stages of the path will be able to take birth wherever there is a need without hesitation. This is quite nice. So this whole world will become like a lovely garden. There is nothing to fear in a lovely garden. So this is quite lovely. And then from the root text, we see you will realize that all phenomena are like an illusion. And to be born again in this is just like walking into a lovely garden. Whether you face prosperity or ruin, you'll have no fear of negative emotions or suffering. Once again, something that is quite amazing to think about. Okay, so that's my very quick look at these 9 benefits that the practice brings. And then maybe we can quickly look at how the Buddha applied this practice, because Kempo presents the root text, introduces this, and also Kempo reflects on that during his teaching. So it starts with going from the palace to enlightenment. And Kempo explains that at his birth, Prince Siddhartha was prophesied to become either a universal monarch with a great power or a Buddha. And then early in his life, to pursue his spiritual quest, he decided to abandon this kingdom, the kingdom of a universal monarch, as if it were nothing more than a handful of straw. Kempo concludes that this was how the Buddha used happiness as a path, because he renounced his throne. And then Kempo adds that after leaving the palace, he stayed by a river for 6 years, and then he lived the life of an ascetic. So he practiced various austerities. He took only 1 drop of water and a single grain of rice each day until the end, until he reached enlightenment. So then he accomplished his own greatest benefits and realized the ultimate truth. Kempo concludes that this is how he used suffering as the path. So from the root text, we see what he showed was that in order to accomplish our own ultimate benefit, the nectar of realization, we must have mastered the one taste of happiness and suffering. Ultimately, they are the same. And then this realization is so important to us. Yeah. So after enlightenment, even if the Buddha was being shown reverence by the chiefs of humans and gods, he felt neither proud nor elated. Kempo concludes that this is how the Buddha transformed happiness into enlightenment. And then when the Buddha was abused, slandered, even accused of sexual misconduct and badly treated, he didn't feel sad or downcast. So according to Kempo, this is how he transformed suffering into enlightenment. I find that part quite interesting and a little bit puzzling, to be honest, because if the Buddha is enlightened, I wonder why, after being enlightened, he still needs to transform happiness into enlightenment. Or again, this is maybe just a manifestation for us, or an example for us to look at the Buddha and see that he's revered so much, and even that, it doesn't go to his head. He doesn't become proud or arrogant or stuff like that. And even if he's dragged into the mud after being enlightened, it does not affect him either. So but still, I was a little bit puzzled when I was reading this. And then from the root text, we read this: in order to accomplish the benefit of sentient beings, again, we have to have mastered that equal taste of happiness and suffering. So Jigme Tenpe Nima brings back again this idea of equal taste of happiness and suffering. So these are great teachings that we receive from the example of the life of the Buddha. And then to conclude, we get to the afterword. We can read this here from the root text. So a teaching like this should really be taught by the Kadampa masters whose very lives enacted their saying. No complaints when there's suffering, great renunciation when there's happiness. But if it's someone like me who explains it, then I'm sure that even my own tongue is going to be fed up and cringe with embarrassment. Still, with the sole aim of making one taste of all the worldly preoccupations, my second nature, I, the old beggar Tenpe Nima, have written this, where here in the forest of many birds. And then Kempo makes a few observations about this part of the root text. He says that many Kadampa masters of the past were very experienced in transforming suffering into happiness. Not just Kadampa masters of the past, obviously, masters of the Nyingma lineage too, but that was part of what he was talking about. And then he adds that Jigme Tenpe Nima is very humble. And he tells us that such a teaching should be really given by a master that has mastered the transformation of suffering and happiness into realization, so that their audience can be fully convinced. And Kempo himself, in the way he writes the text, is quite humble when he says, I'm sure that if someone some of the more accomplished practitioners who were to explain this teaching to you, you might find it more convincing. Personally, I don't need that. I think that Kempo's teaching is absolutely convincing, but that's interesting to hear Kempo say that, maybe some people could be better than him, but that's probably his way of just being humble. Then he states that Jigme Tenpe Nima composed this text in order to pacify his own desire for the 8 worldly dharmas and to cultivate virtuous roots. So Kempo reminds us again that by reading and learning teachings of this type, we can also pacify our own attachment to the 8 worldly concerns. And this is such a positive and encouraging thing to hear. And then Kempo mentioned that over and over throughout these 10 lessons, that this is an actual practice that is really working and that brings so much benefit to us. And finally, he adds that the forest of many birds, which was mentioned at the end, is actually a site near the birthplace of His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche in Qinghai province, where there are also now a great number of practitioners in retreat. So this is also quite interesting to see the connection that exists between these great masters. And maybe to finish, just one last thing that Khenpo said at the end completely. I translated this text in Chengdu during this year's coronavirus pandemic. And it was for me a form of practice that allowed me to transform suffering and happiness into the path. Now the teaching is complete. So thank you for all this. Might have been a little bit long, but hopefully that covers the main elements from a bird's eye view of this last lesson of Khenpo. So thank you, and then hope to see you in the last session. Thank you.